welcome to The Bradley Show. I'm Bradley and today we're going to be talking about the later films of Charlie Chaplin. Towards the end of Charlie Chaplin's 1940 film, The Great Dictator, Chaplin's tramp, reimagined as a Jewish barber, is mistaken for the fascist dictator Adenoid Hinkle. Such a mistaken identity, it turns out, may not only enable the Jewish barber to escape the concentration camp, but also to stop the war. All that is needed is for him to speak. His friend, Schultz, turns to him and tells him so.
You must speak. I can't. You must. It's our only hope. Hope.
This can be seen not only as social commentary, but also a commentary on Chaplin's own film development. Chaplin's early silent films necessarily rendered the tramp mute. The development of sound had originally been greeted by Chaplin with suspicion, yet whilst Chaplin was cautious of putting words in the tramp's mouth, throughout his later films Chaplin felt the need to comment on social upheavals and issues around him. Throughout his later works, Chaplin used his power and financial independence from Hollywood to challenge and satirise the world in which he lived. In 1940, after the rise of Hitler and on the verge of the outbreak of war, Chaplin had thought it necessary to speak out.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
The trajectory towards social commentary was already present in Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which explored the economic realities of the Great Depression. The crash of 1929 had led to excruciating poverty and inequality, and Chaplin had used his tramp character to comment on this. Interestingly, Chaplin's dramatisation of those modern times seems to parallel the critique offered by Marx in Capital. In Marx's critique, capitalist society divides into two different classes. On the one hand, there is the proletariat. The proletariat is someone who looks in the mirror and says, "This is what I'm selling today." Unlike the poor peasantry of the feudal world, who at least had access to some form of land for their subsistence, the proletariat has no such access and survives by selling their labour. The proletariat are commodities who sell themselves as commodities to an employer. This employer class is referred to as the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie represents the interests of capital. Their motivations are very different from that of the proletariat. Where the proletariat sells labour in order to survive, the bourgeoisie, who has recourse to money and control over the means of production, buys the proletariat's labour power. One buys, the other sells. An exchange is made. The capitalist pays the labourer a wage. This wage is necessary so that the proletariat can reproduce and sustain themselves. The wage is used to provide the worker with food, clothing and shelter so that they can sell their body another day. The labour time necessary to produce the wage Marx refers to as necessary labour time, yet the capitalist also wants more than this necessary labour time. The capitalist also wants surplus labour time. The surplus labour time is the amount of time whereby work is no longer needed to reproduce the worker's wage, but rather increases the profits for the capitalist. According to Marx, this becomes the one single life impulse of capital. Because the worker works this extra time neither to produce the product nor reproduce their wages, but simply to further the capitalist profits, Marx sees this as a process of exploitation.
Quit stalling. Get back to work. Go on.
In Marx's analysis, these two different perspectives tend to produce two different ways of viewing technology and the workplace. And this tends to produce two very different motivations. The capitalist tends to want to get the greatest possible benefit out of his commodity, the worker, and tends towards reducing wages, extending the working day, and reducing time for breaks and dinner. Capital's drive for surplus labour time seeks to save time, or to get the most surplus out of the employee, whilst paying as little as possible. Technology is used not in the service of innovation and genuine entrepreneurialism, nor for the ease or comfort of the worker, but simply to speed up production and to provide the discipline that keeps the worker in line. Technology is used to reduce the time needed for lunch and breaks. There emerges what Marx in Capital refers to as nibbling and cribbling at mealtimes. The capitalist wishes to save as much time as possible during the lunch hour. The labourer wishes to extend it. This tends to produce a protracted civil war. Yet this tendency towards the overwork of the proletariat becomes increasingly unstable and unsustainable. Unchecked, capital tends to endanger the whole enterprise. According to Marx, in its blind, unrestrainable passion, its werewolf hunger for surplus labour, capital oversteps not only the moral, but even the merely physical maximum bounds of the working day. It usurps the time for growth, development, and healthy maintenance of the body. It steals the time required for the consumption of fresh air and sunlight. It higgles over a mealtime, incorporating it where possible with the process of production itself, so that food is given to the labourer as a mere means of production, as coal is supplied to the boiler, grease and oil to the machinery. This overwork depletes the worker's body. His body convulses and spasms as it reinvokes the repetitive drudgery that characterises its daily routine. In Chaplin's case, the worker becomes a kind of accidental Luddite, attacking the machinery not out of a pre-planned act of sabotage, but as work itself, carried to its absurd and self-undermining conclusions. The tramp comes to violate the law by following the law all too completely. The compulsion that capital installs in the workers themselves becomes transgressive. If part of what it means to be a member of the proletariat is to be dependent on selling one's labour, the proletariat is also subject to moments when he or she is unable to sell. The unemployed are even deprived of the benefits of being exploited. Without any safety net, this tends to foster a dependency on crime and fosters social disruption. In this setting, prison and workplace exploitation can appear as a blessing. Just as the workplace tends to foster an accidental Luddite, so too do these social inequalities tend to foster an accidental revolutionary, not because Chaplin's tramp has any revolutionary class consciousness, but because the situation is ripe. The accidental change in context transforms the waving of a flag into a revolutionary act. For much of The Great Dictator, Chaplin's tramp, now envisioned as the Jewish barber, is also a kind of accident. The Jewish barber stumbles into situations and stumbles out of them. Even being mistaken as Adenoid Hinkle is an accident. In many respects, the Jewish barber remains true to Chaplin's tramp persona. He is more an accidental resistance to the Nazis than a pre-planned force. He largely remains mute, and it is Hinkle that is given the voice. Yet Hinkle stands directly against liberty, freedom of speech, and democracy, and instead favours imperialism and militarism. In the final scene, we experience a shift from mute to passionate orator. The tramp, compelled by circumstances, can no longer remain silent, and is forced to speak. It is no surprise that this is the last film in which the tramp appears. The need for a voice seems to have rendered him obsolete. In the 1947 film Monsieur, Verdoux, Chaplin takes on a different role. In this film he plays a seemingly charming gentleman who is secretly a serial bigamist, marrying multiple rich women under different aliases and then murdering them so as to provide for himself and his family. The political connotations of this film are amplified when we discover that Monsieur Verdoux's previous career was in banking and real estate, or when he meets the wife of an ammunitions manufacturer. The film suggests that whilst Monsieur Verdoux, in his drive for the accumulation of capital, is violent and cold-hearted, he is not particularly different from those who, in their drive for accumulation, feed off violence and war under the guise and legitimacy of the law. For both, it is all business.
As for being a mass killer, does not the world encourage it? Is it not building weapons of destruction for the sole purpose of mass killing? Has it not blown unsuspecting women and little children to pieces, and done it very scientifically? As a mass killer, I'm an amateur by comparison.
A King in New York turns its attention to the politics of McCarthyism and the Red Scare that was increasingly being used to censor Hollywood movies. Chaplin himself had fallen under suspicion for his highly political films. There grew a paranoid witch hunt and censorial agenda that was increasingly snooping into Hollywood private lives, blacklisting artists and destroying careers. A King in New York fearlessly satirises this. The film opens with the line, "One of the major annoyances of modern life is a revolution." It is an interesting line. For those within the revolution, it is hardly an annoyance. For those in power, a major annoyance would seem an understatement. However, given that the central character, King Igor Shlastov, manages to escape, it is, in fact, more like a major annoyance than a major turmoil. Fleeing Estrovia, King Igor finds himself in New York, courting publicity, media fascination, and high society. The reason for the revolution would appear to be, via his own account, his unwillingness to develop nuclear weapons. Instead, he wished to invest in nuclear energy in order to create, as he says,
a utopia undreamed of.
While in New York, King Igor makes an official visit to one of the local schools, where he meets a young boy named Rupert Maccabee.
And what's that you're reading?
Karl Marx?
Surely you're not a communist.
Do I have to be a communist to read Karl Marx?
Rupert.
What is, of course, true for Rupert also applies to Chaplin himself. Throughout his later films, Chaplin too had flirted with ideas in Karl Marx. Flirting with Marx, or even taking ideas from him, doesn't inherently make you a Marxist. It certainly doesn't make you a Stalinist. This applies as much to Chaplin himself as it does to Rupert. Rupert is certainly not a Stalinist. He opposes all forms of government.
They have every man in a straitjacket, and without a passport he can't move a toe. Am I free to travel?
Of course you're free to travel.
Only with a passport.
Will you allow me to say something?
Only with a passport. Do animals need passports?
Have you finished?
It's in Congress that in this atomic age of speed, we are shut in and shut out by passports.
If you'll shut up and let somebody else talk.
And free speech, does that exist?
No, you've got it all.
And free enterprise.
We were talking of passports.
Today it's all monopoly.
All right. Now will you...
Can I go into the automobile business and compete with the Auto Trust?
If I can get in a word...
Not a chance. Can I go into the grocery business and compete with the chain stores?
Will you shut up?
Not a chance. Monopoly is the menace of free enterprise. As I look back 60 years ago...
Where were you 60 years ago?
He was a glint in his great-grandfather's eye.
Very well now. Have you finished? Now let me say something. Let me tell you how wrong you are.
The monopoly of power is a menace to freedom. It degrades and victimizes every individual. And where is the individual?
I don't know.
Lost in terror because he is made to hate instead of love. If civilization is to survive, we must combat power until the dignity and peace of man are restored.
Yet, at another point, Rupert declares that he is a communist.
Now, tell me, are you a communist?
Yes, sir, I am.
I thought you disliked all forms of government.
I do, but I'm so sick and tired of people asking me if I'm this, if I'm that. So then if it pleases everybody, I'm a communist.
This is more of a symbolic alliance against McCarthyism than a genuine sympathy with Stalinism. Rupert is more like an anarchist than a Stalinist. He is also very different from King Igor, who assumably is a monarchist. And as King Igor himself notes,
Royal communist. The expression is a reductio ad absurdum.
King Igor is a monarchist, albeit one who is open to hearing different positions and wanting to foster his own technological utopia. Yet King Igor's use of the term utopia would itself appear to have made people suspicious of him.
Well, at the moment everyone's in such a state of hysteria that such talk as utopia terrifies them.
On the one hand, Rupert's anarchism and King Igor's respect for differences of opinion and dreams of technological utopianism make them both potentially suspicious to the paranoid McCarthyists. On the other hand, their mutual respect for independent thought builds a strange alliance. Rupert says that
We might have argued, but I thought our talk was stimulating.
King Igor refers to the boy as
Obnoxious, offensive, but a genius.
they can both admire each other despite their differences. After King Igor finds Rupert out in the snow, he takes the boy in and discovers that his parents have been arrested for their involvement in the Communist Party.
Should the boy freeze to death just because his parents are communists?
What enables the strange and awkward alliance of King Igor and Rupert Maccabee is not simply compassion on the part of King Igor, but also a shared belief in the American constitutional rights, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of peaceable assembly. We could easily imagine Rupert scoffing at such constitutional rights. Such rights would appear to share none of his radicalism. We could equally imagine the king scoffing at them. He is a king, why does he need them? Yet such rights contain a universal principle that transcends the ideological differences of Igor and Rupert. On the one hand, such rights are often strategically important. We can never know the moment when any of us might need to appeal to them. Whether we are a communist or an anarchist or a king tainted by association, we all need the right to speak freely. On the other hand, there is something important about freedom of speech in itself. There is something intrinsically unhealthy about McCarthyist paranoia. It is an affront on individual freedom that undermines the possibility of fearless and reasonable debate and fosters a culture of insecurity. This doesn't create a culture where people reasonably and carefully assess risks and address problems. It stifles nonconformity, yet also inhibits our capacity to reassess our own positions, notice flaws and move on. It might be that revolution is a major annoyance, but so too is the repressive attempt to remove from the world any potential trace of one. It is no surprise that both the Stalinist show trials and the McCarthyist communist hunts shared an unsettling parallel, a destructive paranoia that undermined the potential for reasonable discussion and debate and fostered fear and insecurity that turned all against all. This is why we should be highly suspicious of censorship as a political tool. Censorship is often the last refuge of those who have already lost. It is often a frantic act that attempts to control those you believe you have no power to persuade or convince. What the censor produces is not debate and persuasion, but fear. A fear that, if you are lucky, forces your opponent to shut up for a bit. Yet often the censors are not even that lucky. What they produce is rebellion, confusion, and through their cack-handed use of force turn their own allies against themselves. Censors give up persuading because deep down they believe they have already lost. Yet there is a different approach to politics, an approach that will become a central theme in coming episodes. This approach might be called counterculture. With counterculture, you don't attempt to censor your opponents, but instead inspire and persuade. In many ways, we tend to associate counterculture with the cultural rebellion of the 60s and 70s. But in a way, Chaplin was also trying to produce a kind of counterculture, or at least he challenged particular orthodox ideas through the use of culture. This is a fundamentally different approach to censorship. Censorship is reactive. Counterculture is proactive. Censorship is defensive. Counterculture is offensive. Censorship shuts down its opponents. Counterculture creates an alternative. Censorship silences. Counterculture inspires. Censorship shuts down debate. Counterculture reframes the debate. Of course, there is a limit to the power of speech. There is something almost naive about the end of the Great Dictator. The idea that you could have stopped Hitler and the march to war by providing a simple yet powerful speech is absurd. The power of persuasion can be profound, but it often takes the time and energy of many different people building alliances, making cases, and working against a backdrop of broader social, technological, and economic changes. However, speech and persuasion, given time, can be profoundly powerful, even if at times it feels like a slow, arduous, and treacherous struggle.
This is one of the things that makes Chaplin admirable, his courage to give voice to ideas and open up conversations, even or especially when his opponents were ferociously authoritarian, censorial and repressive.
This has been The Bradley Show. Thank you for watching. Feel free to subscribe and don't forget to comment. See you soon!